Everyone in town thought the billionaire's father, John Larson, would not live past 3 months. The doctors had tried every medicine, every new treatment, but nothing worked. His health was fading, and the family was slowly preparing for the worst. Everyone had accepted it, everyone except one woman. She wasn't a doctor, she wasn't a nurse, she wasn't even family. She was just the maid who had recently joined the mansion. Quiet, humble, almost invisible. But she saw something nobody else saw. And when she followed her heart, what she uncovered would shake the entire family to its core. Before we continue with this powerful story, dear viewers, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to help us grow, hit the like button, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. David Larson, the billionaire, was a man who controlled companies, workers, and money that most people could never imagine. People saw him as strong and untouchable. But on one cold Tuesday morning, David felt like a small child again. His phone had rung while he was sitting in his office. It was the doctor from the hospital where his father had been doing tests. The doctor's voice was calm but sharp. "David, I'm sorry. It's a rare, aggressive cancer. Your father has about 3 months left, maybe less." The words hit David like a stone to the chest. For a few seconds, he could not breathe. He stared at the floor of his office, his hands shaking as he held the phone. His father, John Larson, was 78 years old. A strong man all his life. A man who had taught David how to fish, how to ride a bike, how to stay humble even when money was plenty. Now this same man was being told he only had weeks left. David dropped everything and rushed to the hospital. As he walked through the white hallways, his mind was full of memories, his father smiling on birthdays, giving advice late at night, and patting his back when life felt too heavy. Now, seeing him lying weak on the hospital bed, David felt his heart sink. The doctors explained everything clearly. The cancer had spread too fast. They would try treatments, but they were not promising anything. Still, David begged them to try. "Do whatever it takes," he said. "Don't hold back." And so the fight began. First came chemotherapy, long hours with tubes in his father's arm, hoping the medicine would slow the sickness. But soon, tests showed no improvement. Then came immunotherapy, a new kind of treatment they thought could help. Again, no progress. David was not ready to stop. He spent millions of dollars bringing specialists from different countries. He bought the most expensive machines, enrolled his father in clinical trials, and even looked at experimental medicines not yet approved. Each time, hope rose for a moment. Each time, it came crashing down. No treatment worked. At night, David often sat in the hospital room beside his father. He would smile during the day to give hope, but when he stepped outside into the dark hallways, he broke down. Sometimes nurses would pass by and see the billionaire leaning against the wall with tears on his face. He had money, but money could not fix this. David remembered another painful loss. Years ago, his wife Linda had passed away. That loss had left him broken for years. Now, watching his father fade, that old wound opened again. He told himself he would never recover if he lost his father too. The hospital room became David's second home. He rarely left. He brought coffee in the mornings, sat with his father during the day, and held his hand at night. Sometimes he brought old photo albums showing pictures of fishing trips or family birthdays. Sometimes he played his father's favorite songs on his phone. They laughed together, they cried together, but inside, David feared each moment could be the last. As weeks passed, his father grew weaker. Eating became hard. Staying awake became harder. Most days, John slept long hours, opening his eyes for only a few minutes. His voice grew softer, sometimes just whispers. The doctors did their best to manage the pain, but their faces told the truth. They had no cure left. David hated the feeling of powerlessness. He was a man who always had control. In business, he could solve any problem with money or smart decisions. But here, sitting beside his father's bed, he felt smaller than ever. No amount of wealth could stop the cancer from spreading. One evening, after another round of bad test results, the doctors sat with David. They spoke slowly, choosing their words carefully. "Mr. Larson, your father has less than 3 months. It is time to prepare." David nodded, but inside he was screaming. He had fought so hard, but now it was no longer a fight. It was a countdown. He sat in silence for hours that night, staring at his father's sleeping face. How could he tell him? How could he explain that the time they had left together was so short? When he finally gathered the courage and told his father, he expected tears, anger, or maybe fear. But John Larson surprised everyone. He did not cry. He did not shout. He simply took a deep breath, gave a small smile, and said, "Then I want a birthday party." David blinked, confused. "A birthday party? Yes," his father whispered. "It has been decades since I had one. I want music. I want cake. I want to see my old friends. If my days are short, let me live them with joy. Not as a patient, but as a man." David sat frozen. He had spent millions on doctors and medicines. Now his father was asking for something so simple, a birthday party, and that request would mark the beginning of something David never expected. For weeks he had poured his money and energy into chasing cures, flying in doctors, and paying for treatments. Yet in the end, his father didn't ask for more medicine. He didn't ask for another test or another trial. All he wanted was a birthday party. At first, David did not know how to feel. Should he be happy? Should he be sad? The idea of a party when his father was so close to death felt strange. But when he looked into his father's eyes, he saw a spark he hadn't seen in weeks. A spark of life. Maybe that was the answer. So, David agreed. "All right, Dad. You will have your birthday party. I'll make it happen." The next morning, the mansion staff were busy. Decorations, music, and food, everything had to be arranged. David made phone calls to old family friends, inviting them. Some were shocked to hear from him after so many years, but most agreed to come. The hospital team also offered help. A doctor promised to play guitar. A nurse said she would decorate. Even the mansion cooks wanted to bake a special cake. For the first time in months, the mansion was not filled with sadness. There was movement, voices, and laughter as people prepared for something joyful. And in the middle of all the busyness was the maid, Aaliyah. She had only been working in the house for a short time, but she moved with quiet purpose. She did not just follow orders, she did what she felt was needed. She made sure John Larson's clothes were ironed and clean. She prepared his favorite soup. She checked his medicines and arranged his chair so he could sit comfortably. David noticed something unusual. Whenever John seemed restless or in pain, Aaliyah was the one who calmed him. She didn't need to say much. Sometimes she would hold his hand. Other times she would read a book softly or hum a song. And somehow, John would relax. One night, when everyone had gone home, David returned to the hospital to check on his father. He was surprised to find Aaliyah still there. She was sitting in the chair beside the bed, her head leaning against the wall, half asleep. She had not been asked to stay. But she had chosen to. David touched her shoulder gently. "You don't need to stay this late," he whispered. Aaliyah opened her eyes slowly and gave a tired smile. "He shouldn't be alone," she said simply. That was the moment David began to truly see her. She was more than just a maid. There was something deeper in the way she cared. A few days before the party, Aaliyah finally shared a piece of her own past with David. They were sitting in the hospital hallway, waiting for John's tests. Her voice was soft as she spoke. "When I was young, I had a sister. Her name was Sarah. She was very sick. We didn't have money for good doctors. We tried, but we couldn't save her. She died young, and I always blamed myself. I promised myself that if I ever had the chance to help someone, I would never walk away. Never again." David listened in silence. Suddenly, everything made sense. The way she stayed late, the way she never complained, the way she cared for his father, as if he were her own. The day of the party finally arrived. The mansion looked different. There were balloons tied to chairs, old photographs placed on the walls, and music playing softly. It was not a grand billionaire celebration. It was something simple, warm, and full of love. Guests arrived slowly. Old friends who had not seen John in years walked in with flowers and gifts. Some were weak and walked with canes, but their smiles lit up the room. The nurses from the hospital came too, wearing bright clothes instead of uniforms. Everyone wanted this day to be special. When John Larson entered the room in his wheelchair, the guests clapped and cheered. His face lit up with joy. He laughed, hugged old friends, and even cracked small jokes. For a few hours, it did not feel like sickness was in the room. It felt like life had returned. David stood at the side, watching with tears in his eyes. This was not the party he had imagined, but it was the one his father needed. In the middle of the celebration, something happened that no one expected. John reached out and held Aaliyah's hand. The room fell quiet. He looked at her with soft eyes and whispered, "Will I still live, my daughter?" He didn't call her Aaliyah. He didn't call her Maid. He called her daughter. Everyone froze. Some gasped, some wiped their eyes. David felt his chest tighten. Aaliyah's eyes filled with tears, but she did not let them fall. She squeezed his hand gently and answered, "I will always be here with you." It was not a promise of life. It was a promise of presence, of love, of never leaving. The music stopped for a moment. The guests were silent. The weight of her words filled the room. And then, slowly, the music started again. The party continued, but something had changed. Everyone could feel it. That night, after the guests left and the mansion grew quiet, Aaliyah lay awake in her small room. She could not forget John's words. "Will I still live, my daughter?" They echoed in her mind like a bell she could not silence. She whispered to herself in the dark, "I won't lose him. Not again." And in that moment, a dangerous and life-changing plan began to grow inside her heart. The night after the party, Aaliyah could not sleep. She lay awake in her small bed at the mansion, staring at the ceiling. The words of old Mr. John Larson kept playing in her head. "Will I still live, my daughter?" That question had pierced her heart. She had seen death before. She had held her sister's hand when she took her last breath, and she had promised herself she would never stand by helpless again. But now here she was, watching another person she loved slipping away. She could not just fold her hands and wait for death. She sat up, turned on her old laptop, and began to search. For hours, she read medical articles, stories, and hospital pages. Most of what she found were treatments that David had already tried: chemotherapy, immunotherapy, clinical trials. But then, one line caught her attention: living donor liver transplant. Her eyes froze on the screen. She clicked. She read. The words gave her hope, but also fear. It said that sometimes when a patient's liver was failing, a healthy person could donate a part of theirs. The liver could grow back naturally. The problem was, it was rare. It was risky. And it was even more dangerous for older patients like John. Still, it was hope. Aaliyah pressed her hands together. Could she do this? Could she give a part of her own body to save him? She thought about her sister. She thought about the way John had called her daughter. She thought about David, who was breaking down in silence every night. By the time the sun rose, her mind was made up. She would try. The next morning, she went to the private clinic in the city. She did not tell David. She did not tell anyone. She wanted to be sure first. The doctor at the clinic was surprised when she explained her request. "You want to be tested as a donor?" he asked, eyebrows raised. "Yes," Aaliyah said firmly. "Who is the patient?" "John Larson. He is like a father to me." The doctor frowned. "Usually, only close relatives are accepted. But we can at least test for compatibility." They drew her blood, ran scans, checked her body from head to toe. The process took days. She would take the bus quietly to the city, spend hours at the clinic, and return to the mansion like nothing happened. No one knew her secret. Finally, 1 week later, she received a call. She hurried back to the clinic, her heart beating fast. The doctor held a file in his hands. "Aaliyah," he said slowly, "you are a perfect match. Your blood type, your liver size, everything fits." She froze in shock. For a moment, her legs felt weak. Then, tears rolled down her face. She was not crying out of fear. She was crying because she finally held something real, a chance. But then came the blow. The doctor sighed and shook his head. "Even if you're a match, the law does not allow us to perform this transplant unless you are a close family member or a legal relative. You're not." "I'm sorry." Aaliyah's mouth went dry. She begged, "Please." "He calls me daughter. He sees me as family." The doctor's voice stayed firm. "Rules are rules. I cannot break them." She left the clinic with the envelope of results in her bag. She walked slowly back to the bus station, her heart heavy. When she reached her small room in the mansion, she opened the envelope again and stared at the words, "Compatible donor." She folded the paper, placed it in her drawer, and sat on the bed in silence. That night, David came by to thank her again for helping with the party. He told her how much it had meant to his father. She smiled, nodded, but said nothing about the test. She wanted to tell him, but fear held her back. What if he said no? What if the surgery failed and they blamed her? Every night after that, she would open the drawer, read the paper again, then close it. She kept whispering to herself, "I can't lose him. Not this time." The days at the hospital grew harder. John was weaker. His voice was fading. Sometimes he would not even open his eyes for hours. David stayed by his side every day, but Aaliyah noticed the fear in his face. One evening, when David had stepped out to take a call, John opened his eyes and saw Aaliyah beside him. He smiled weakly. "My daughter," he whispered, "you are always here." "Yes," she whispered back, squeezing his hand. Her chest tightened. That word, daughter Daydor, gave her strength. That night, she made a decision. If the law in her country would not allow it, she would find another way. She went back to her laptop and searched again. This time, she typed, "Liver transplant abroad." She sent emails to hospitals in different countries. Some replied with the same answer, "We cannot accept non-family donors." Others never replied at all. But then, one message came from a foreign clinic abroad. The doctor who replied was named Dr. Robert. When she explained everything on the phone, Dr. Robert was silent for a long time. Then he said, "I once lost my own daughter to liver disease. If someone had been willing to save her, I would have allowed it. I will review your case." For the first time in weeks, Aaliyah felt hope again. Days passed, and Aaliyah waited anxiously for a reply from Dr. Robert at the foreign clinic abroad. Each night after caring for Mr. John at the hospital, she would rush back to her small room in the mansion, check her old laptop, and refresh her email again and again. Finally, the message came. Dr. Robert had reviewed her medical tests and confirmed that the transplant could be done in his clinic. The rules in his country were different. If she agreed to sign papers taking full responsibility for the risks, the surgery could move forward. Aaliyah stared at the email, her hands shaking. This was it, a real chance. It was dangerous. She knew she could die on the operating table. But her heart was set. She whispered to herself, "If I can give him life, then I will do it. I will not stand by and lose him like I lost my sister." At the same time, David Larson was planning a short business trip to Chicago. He almost canceled it because he didn't want to leave his father. But Aaliyah encouraged him. "Go," she said gently. "I will watch him." He trusted her. She had become more than just a maid. She was his father's comfort. She was his own silent strength. And so, with a heavy heart, David boarded his flight, not knowing what Aaliyah was about to do. The moment his plane took off, Aaliyah began her plan. She had been preparing quietly for days. She had packed a small bag with clothes, medicines, and all of Mr. John's medical records. She had arranged private transport to take them straight to the airport. When she told Mr. John they were going somewhere that might help him, he didn't argue. His body was weak, but his trust in Aaliyah was strong. She had become his daughter in heart, and he followed her without question. The journey was long and tiring. John slept most of the way, his fragile frame leaning against the chair. Aaliyah stayed awake the whole time, checking his blanket, checking his breathing, whispering prayers under her breath. When they finally arrived at the foreign clinic abroad, Dr. Robert and his team were waiting. The admission was quiet and secret. No reporters, no noise, no family, just the doctors, nurses, Aaliyah, and John. That night, Aaliyah wrote a short letter. She placed it on the table beside John's bed. The letter said only one thing: "If I don't wake up, know that your daughter said yes." The next morning, the surgeries began. Aaliyah was taken to one operating room. John was taken to another, right beside hers. She looked at him one last time before the doors closed. He gave her a weak smile. She whispered, "Everything will be all right." The doctors put her to sleep. The surgery started. They carefully cut into her body and removed a part of her liver. Her breathing slowed, her body weak, but her sacrifice was now real. Meanwhile, in the next room, Dr. Robert's team worked on John. They carefully placed Aaliyah's liver inside him, connecting veins and arteries, every move dangerous, every second critical. Hours passed. The sun set outside, and still the operations continued. Back in Chicago, David Larson was sitting in a meeting when his phone rang. It was an international number. Confused, he stepped outside and answered. "Mr. Larson," a calm voice said, "your father and your maid are in surgery right now. A living liver transplant is being performed." David's world spun. "What? Surgery? Where?" His voice shook. "They are both alive, but very weak. You need to come." David dropped his briefcase and rushed to the airport. His heart pounded the entire flight. He kept imagining the worst. What if his father died? What if Aaliyah never woke up? He had trusted her, and now she was risking her life in secret. By the time he reached the foreign clinic abroad, it was early morning again. A nurse led him quietly through the hallways until he entered the recovery room. David froze. There, in one bed, lay his father, unconscious, connected to machines. In the bed beside him lay Aaliyah, pale and still, her body weak from surgery. On the small table between them was the letter. David picked it up and read the words, "If I don't wake up, know that your daughter said yes." His knees almost gave way. He sat down between the two beds, holding his father's hand in one and Aaliyah's in the other. Tears streamed down his face. For the first time in years, the billionaire who had power and money over the world felt completely helpless. He whispered, "Please, God, don't take them from me." The machines beeped softly. The doctors entered the room and gave him the first update. The surgery had gone well. Both were alive, but the risk was not over. Recovery would take time. David stayed there for hours. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, changing drips, but David did not move. He sat between his father and the maid who had given everything. For the first time, he understood the true meaning of sacrifice. It was not about money or contracts or fame. It was about love. Aaliyah had proven that with her body, her blood, and her life. Back in his mansion, people had no idea what had happened. To the outside world, nothing had changed. But inside that quiet hospital room, everything was different. A maid had risked her life for a man who once had only 3 months left. A father lay with a second chance inside him. And a billionaire sat between them, his heart forever changed. But the story was not over. The hardest days were still to come. The recovery room was quiet, with only the sound of machines beeping slowly. David Larson sat between his father and Aaliyah, holding both their hands. He had not eaten. He had not slept. All he could do was wait. He kept reading the letter Aaliyah had left. "If I don't wake up, know that your daughter said yes." Each time he read those words, his chest tightened. She had gone behind his back, risked her life, and done what even money could not do. She had given part of herself so that his father might live. 2 days passed. Nurses checked them every hour. Doctors whispered updates, but David hardly heard. He prayed silently, begged silently, and hoped silently. Then, on the 3rd day, something happened. John Larson's hand twitched. At first, David thought he imagined it, but then it moved again. David jumped to his feet and called for the nurse. Slowly, John's eyes opened. He blinked, confused, then whispered, "Water." Tears filled David's eyes. His father was alive. Weak, yes, but alive. The doctors rushed in, checked his vitals, and nodded. The surgery is holding. The new liver is working. John's voice was faint, but he managed to ask one question. "Where's Aaliyah?" David looked at the bed beside him. Aaliyah was still unconscious, her face pale but peaceful. "She's resting," David whispered. "She's still fighting." John smiled weakly. "My daughter," he said softly, before drifting back to sleep. Days passed. John grew stronger little by little. He could sit up, eat soft food, and even laugh at small jokes. But Aaliyah's bed remained still. She breathed with the help of machines, her body weak from the surgery. Doctors explained that her liver would grow back naturally, but her body needed time. "She is young and strong," Dr. Roberts said. "She just needs to wake up." David never left her side. He told her stories, held her hand, and updated her about John's progress, even though she could not respond. Nurses began to whisper about her in the hallways. Some brought flowers. Others stopped by just to see the maid who had given part of herself to save her employer's father. She was no longer just the maid. In their eyes, she was a hero. On the 5th day, the miracle happened. David was reading quietly by her bed when he felt her fingers move. He froze, then leaned closer. Her hand moved again, this time gripping his weakly. He shouted for the nurse. Slowly, Aaliyah's eyelids fluttered. Her lips parted. She blinked against the light and looked around. Her eyes landed on David first. He smiled through tears. "You're back," he whispered. Then from the other bed, John's voice came, soft but full of joy. "My daughter is awake." Aaliyah turned her head and saw him smiling at her. Tears filled her eyes. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. Instead, she just nodded, smiling weakly through the pain. The room was silent, filled only with emotion. Doctors and nurses stood quietly, allowing the moment to belong to them. The days after that were full of healing. John's body accepted the transplant well. The cancer that once resisted every medicine now began to shrink with the help of treatment. For the first time, doctors used the word progress. Aaliyah, too, grew stronger. Each day she sat up a little more, walked a little more, smiled a little more. David stayed close to both of them, often looking from his father to Aaliyah and wondering how life had changed so suddenly. News of the surgery began to spread. First, a local newspaper wrote a short article, "Maid risks life to save billionaire's father." Then bigger channels picked it up. Soon, the story was on national TV. Reporters called, journalists came to the clinic, and organizations wanted to give awards. But Aaliyah refused them all. She looked David in the eyes and said, "This story is not for sale. I did not do it for fame. I did it because he is family to me." David respected her choice. He shielded her from the media, turning away reporters at the gate of the mansion once they returned home. 1 year later, the mansion was no longer quiet and sad. It was full of life again. On John Larson's 79th birthday, the house overflowed with guests, family, friends, neighbors. The dining hall was decorated with balloons, flowers, and a large cake. John sat at the head of the table, no longer weak in a wheelchair but walking slowly with help. His eyes shone with life. David stood proudly beside him, greeting guests and telling them, Last year we didn't think this day would come. But here we are. In the corner, Aaliyah wore a simple dress, smiling quietly. She didn't want attention, but every guest who looked at her knew the truth. She was the reason this day was possible. Later that evening, as the laughter died down and the guests sat in small groups, John reached for Aaliyah's hand. His voice was steady now. "Now," he asked softly, "I will live, right, my daughter?" The room went silent. Everyone looked at them. Aaliyah knelt beside him, held his hands tightly, and smiled through tears. "Yes," she said firmly, "you will live." The guests wiped their eyes. David stood back, his chest full. He remembered the hospital nights, the surgeries, the letter, the fear. And now here they were, alive, together, a family.